pro-abortion lobby group Gun Free South Africa has once again called for the reduction of the availability of guns through two key interventions following recent mass shootings in the country. The group wants government to strengthen strategies and to implement robust measures to prevent illegal guns from leaking into the illegal market. Gun Free SA founding member Adèle Kirsten joins us for more. Adèle, thanks for your time. Good to speak to you under the circumstances. Now, we've reported that in the last 3 months, 120 people or thereabouts have died in a mass shooting. So what is your reaction to that?
Good afternoon, Hugo. Well, Gun Free South Africa tracks gun violence trends and numbers across the country. And we first noticed this phenomenon of mass shooting where there are more than one shooter, more than 4 people are shot and killed, and often with multiple wounds. And the first incident of this kind was in July 2022 in a tavern in Soweto, where 16 people were shot and killed. Over the last 2 years, one has seen an increase in this phenomenon. And what was, happening, say, several times a year is now almost happening weekly. So we're certainly seeing an increase in the scale and the severity of these shootings. And I think the consensus amongst those of us who work in this area is that it's the increased availability and the easy access to both firearms and ammunition that's perhaps the single most important contributor to the significant increase that we're seeing across the country.
Adèle, we are going to talk in a moment about availability of these guns, but I want to touch on something else at the moment, and that speaks to the type of guns that are being used in these mass shootings. So in the one instance, we've noticed that there have been handguns, so pistols, I'd imagine, but there's also a proliferation of rifles, the likes of AK-47s. Now, what do you read into that?
So that's really important information because it tells us, it gives us at least some clue to where the gun is coming from, the legal source. And it's one of our calls to government is that to prioritize recovering these guns, but once they're recovered, to do track and trace, because you need to understand the legal source. If it's a handgun, the type of gun it is will tell you whether it's a police issue firearm or a handgun that most civilians would have in their possession. And so handguns remain certainly across other kinds of crime like armed robbery, house invasions. They remain the weapon of choice for criminals. So that's coming either from your police issue or from civilians. Something like a rifle, depending on the type of rifle, if it's an R1, R4, we know that that's a military issue. So you're looking at your SANDF, either your stores or individuals within the military. An AK-47 tells you it's most likely cross-border and trade, so that's already an illicit market. That's not from the legal market. But we're in talking to police officers, certainly here in the Cape Flats, they're noticing an increase in the kinds of weapons that are issued for sports shooters, semi-automatic weapons. We're also seeing an increase in these blank firearms, which are being modified to take 9mm ammunition rounds. So this gives us really important information. We know the private security industry is also a source of loss and theft. So we're already sitting with a lot of intelligence, which gives you an understanding of where you need to close off the tap. You have to stop the supply, and that's really the job of SAPS.
Fantastic. So you've got a huge amount of information. And one of the things that you've said, at least one of the things that I've said in the intro, is that you are calling for government to strengthen strategies and to implement robust measures to prevent legal guns from leaking into the illegal market. So unpack for us what that actually means.
Okay. So Hugo, if we start kind of the first step is, I think everyone agrees that we have to stop the circulation of illegal guns in the criminal market. there are really two ways in which you do that. You have to mop up. You have to get rid of the guns that are already in circulation. And the only way to do that is to recover them. And that's through search and seizure, through intelligence-driven sort of specialist firearms units. Once SAPs have recovered those guns, they have to track and trace them. They have to determine the source, because that tells you the supply line. Now, we know the majority of guns are legal entities. They're legally manufactured. And so you need to then follow them right up to the source. So that's about mopping up. But then you have to turn off the tap because we have this constant supply of guns moving from the legal into the criminal economy. Now, there are a number of things that can be done, and this would not just be SAPS, this is more a sort of whole of government response. But in terms of SAPS, the one thing is, if you don't know what your legal stocks are, it's very difficult to estimate what's then moving into the illegal market. And right now, with the dysfunctionality of the Central Firearms Registry, with the kind of loss and theft that's happening from civilians as well as from the state, we really, and then we have official institutions who have over 2.2 million licensed guns across our government departments. No audits have been done on these guns. We don't know what the loss and theft is. So you can see there are a whole number of actions. For gun-free, the priority would be to fix the Central Firearms Registry. That's an urgent action, but it also will take time. The second thing that could happen is to actually place a moratorium on the issuing of licenses for, say, 6 months. So that's quite a bold intervention, but it means that right now, with the dysfunctionality in the CFR, it's a perfect opportunity for fraud and corruption. So we know that many people, for example, become dedicated sports shooters in order, because there's not a limit on the number of guns you can own, in order to accumulate weapons. We know that there's a fraudulent issuing of licenses. So there might be people who are in that category who aren't genuine sports shooters, but they're using the loophole in the gun law to accumulate weapons. And that's our third intervention, or our call for another intervention, is to strengthen the existing law. So you can see, I mean, these are big, bold actions that are required, but unless this is taken urgently, we will continue to see these kind of mass shootings.
Well, it raises two questions, those statements that you've made. And the first one would be, just how many licenses are being issued every month if a moratorium of 6 months is going to be significant, is the first question. And the second question, Adèle, speaks to if any individual robs a SAPS or robs a legal owner of a firearm, they're going to have to buy ammunition, because more often than not, they're not robbing ammunition and gun or at the same time, right? Does that offer an opportunity, the fact that they will need to purchase ammunition from a particular point? Is that a telltale sign? Is that an indicator of who might be making the purchases and subsequently using the firearms?
Hugo, you're raising two really important points. And I'm going to start with the ammunition. That's one of the weaknesses in our law, both in the Act itself, but in the enforcement of the current law. So the limit is, in the current Act, the limit is 200 rounds of ammunition per weapon, per firearm that's registered. In this country, you license the individual and register the gun for each individual gun. So you allow 200 rounds of ammunition, that's the limit. What's happening is, because the Central Firearms Registry is dysfunctional, there's not an integrated database which tracks, a bit like when you go to the chemist. You know, you can't go and buy a cough mixture here and then go to the next chemist and get something else. So an individual who wants to use a gun for criminal purposes can go to dealer 1, get 200 rounds of ammunition, go to dealer 2, get another 200 rounds of ammunition. It's a huge, big loophole in our current law. And gun-free is also advocating that we reduce the number of ammunition rounds to 100. So that's one aspect, and that's something that could be fixed fairly straight away, because unless the kind of unlimited supply of ammunition is part of what's driving these levels of gun violence. And then on the other is we track particularly from 2021 with the July unrest in KwaZulu-Natal. You saw a very dramatic increase in gun license applications over that period. So if we're just looking over the last 3 years, because it's been up, down patterns, you've had just over 400,000 firearm license applications received. That doesn't mean they've been issued, but it gives you some idea about the demand for guns in our country.
Just some thoughts for you to reflect on around the recent. So we've had a number of mass shootings, but we also seem to have an equal number of shootings of criminals by police across the country. And this has almost happened in the last few months since the new police minister took over. Do you get a sense that SAPS, whilst they may not be on top of things, are certainly moving in the right direction in dealing with some of those criminals that are using many of these unlicensed firearms or firearms that have been stolen?
So this is an important area, I think, for much more public conversation and engagement with SAPS. But certainly our understanding from the Minister of Police is that he's made it very clear that he will prioritize addressing firearm-related crime and violence. And I think there are signs that that's happening. There seems to be at least an increased reporting of the recovery of guns. When it comes to the issue where you're talking about where we have a situation where criminals are armed, where they are moving in groups of 4 or 5, and they've got powerful semi-automatic and fully automatic weapons, that presents a real danger to our police officers. And so in a way, part of Gun Free's call for reducing availability and addressing this issue is saying police officers are really vulnerable in their job because of the availability of guns. I think within civil society, there's a lot of discussion around the action of the police and whether this is a sign of the failure of intelligence-driven policing. But I think the context is such where you'll see the support for it from the public. And that's because I think people are feeling frustrated. Police are frustrated. In the long term, I'm not sure it's the most sustainable approach.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave that conversation. Gun Free SA's founding member, Adèle Kirsten, appreciate your time talking to us about the initiatives that Gun Free South Africa is advocating for.